you believe that the Lord tonight has set you free? Yes, sir. Turn around and tell those people. Tell them, I'm not gay no more. I am delivered. I don't like men no more. I said I like women. Women. I said women. I'm not gay. I would not date a man. I would not carry a purse. I would not put on makeup. I will love a woman. Now listen, y'all praise.
Hey guys, welcome to Let's Be Honest, a space that honors and supports Black queer women while also challenging unique issues in our communities. Please be sure to subscribe and click the like button if you're feeling our content. All right, so getting started, we first want to tell you why we decided to start this channel. And Sash and I, we have a lot of conversations about different topics. Almost every day we're talking about something that's controversial, and sometimes we see eye to eye and sometimes we disagree. But we did notice that there wasn't a great deal of content on YouTube that just talks seriously about some of the issues that Black queer women experience. So we just wanted to kind of add what we would like to see, and hopefully you guys would be able to extend the conversations that we have.
Okay, so for today's video, we're going to talk about internalized homophobia in Black queer women.
Right, so the topic was inspired by me talking to Sash about some of the experiences I had when I would go to church. And there were multiple occasions as an adult where I went to one church with a woman that I was dating, and another instance where I went to church with just a friend who was also lesbian. And both experiences, I went to the church and it started off as a wonderful experience. And then at some point during the sermon, the minister said something homophobic. I remember my first time going to church with an ex-girlfriend. He made the comment about, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And I immediately felt uncomfortable. And I looked to my ex-girlfriend and she just kind of nodded her head in agreement. And that was very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
That was very uncomfortable for me. And I talked to her about it afterwards and I said, did you hear that, the homophobic comment? She says, yeah, it was pretty messed up, but overall it was a pretty good message. And then when I went with my friend some years later, a completely different church, and had a similar experience, and she was also in agreement, and she pretty much scoffed at it too. She said, all in all, it's a pretty good church. He means well. She said that the minister meant well.
You know what? I actually think that's pretty common because some years back, I went to church with an ex-girlfriend of mine, and I had two very different experiences. We went to church more than twice, but two experiences really stand out to me. So the first church we went to was actually a gay-friendly church. We sought that out, and the environment was very inviting, and the sermon was great. But when we left, she said, something's wrong with the church. And I was like, what's wrong?
Okay.
And she said, it's a lot of gay people there.
Mm.
And she never wanted to go back to that church.
She didn't want to go back?
No, she never wanted to go back, and we never went back. But then there was another church that we started going to, and probably about 6 weeks of us going there, after about 6 weeks of us going there, the pastor was preaching a sermon, and he said, the penis goes into the vagina.
Wow.
And it was very, very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at her for some kind of validation. But when we left the church, we tried to have a conversation about it, And she was completely content with the idea of making that our home church. And at the time, I hadn't really deconstructed those two experiences.
And I think that this is an experience that many of us have probably gone through. It's just something that probably is not often talked about. And I know for me, just thinking back on my experiences, both with the ex and my friend, that I didn't really challenge both of them because I didn't really want to come off as disrespecting their religious beliefs or being in a position where I wanted them to feel like they had to defend something that they hold very sacred. But I just never really felt comfortable after that. And I didn't go to either church afterwards. But it just really left like a wedge of conflict between that friendship and that relationship because I always wondered how could you go to a space that tells you that you are inferior. Like it wasn't until adulthood that, because I'm just gonna be honest, I don't go to church every Sunday. I don't. I'm not really a church going person for mostly for some of the reasons that we've listed, but church is not really my thing. So the few times that I do go to church, when I have these experiences, it makes me I'm not compelled to go back anytime soon.
Right, and I hear that perspective. I do think that we also have to consider how a person's upbringing can play a role in that, because if you're raised in an environment where you're being sent those messages or you're hearing those messages, it might feel familiar to place yourself in that kind of environment. You know, even outside of religion and the church, it really isn't that uncommon in Black families for queer people to be expected to adjust our lifestyle to accommodate other people. So I can't tell you how many times I was introduced as a friend, um, and told that I should be grateful for the mere fact that I was being tolerated in their family space, and it was often packaged as them being welcoming or accepting. And that was always pretty confusing for me. But going back to what we were just talking about, when we're raised in an environment like that, we start to confuse tolerance with acceptance. And then we internalize that tolerance and project it onto other people.
I think you're right. You know, when you talk about tolerance and acceptance, it makes me think about my past relationships, and especially when I was dating a woman in the South, and I'm from the South myself, specifically in the Bible Belt. And unfortunately, I had many encounters where I was dating a woman who identified as a lesbian, but she was very religiously conflicted and she was even ashamed of her orientation. And so, in one aspect, she was very firm about her sexual preference, but then, and we're talking about grown women, right? We're not talking about kids, we're talking about women of a certain age that were super grown and they had issues with what their religious teachings taught them and how their parents were going to accept them strictly because of what their interpretation of the Bible was. And so it was odd to me because even though I grew up in a household where my mom was Baptist, I didn't really experience a lot of homophobia in the church as a kid. And this wasn't something that was on my radar until I became an adult on the dating scene and just experiencing quite a few Black women who privately they embraced their lesbianism, but publicly they were really ashamed because of their fear of going to hell.
You know, that's interesting because I grew up in a very conservative religious home, and I was actually very much exposed to homophobic messages from a very early age. But I've always been open about who I am, probably to the point of making other people around me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen my sexual orientation as something to be ashamed of. Okay. But if I'm being transparent, after being in a toxic situation for a long time, and this was years ago, but feeling like I wasn't getting the basic fundamental care and concern in that relationship, it kind of got to the point where I felt like I was emotionally and financially overexerting myself. And instead of me saying, this isn't the right relationship for me, or this is a flaw or defect of this particular relationship, I internalized that as being a flaw of lesbian relationships in general.
Okay.
And so at the time, like, if we would get into arguments, she might say something like, this is why two women shouldn't be together, or God's never going to bless our relationship. Mm-hmm. Even though heterosexual relationships were crumbling all around us.
So it sounded like basically you started to take on a lot of her issues.
Right. I internalized whatever conflict she was going through.
Okay.
And thought, maybe she is onto something. I thought, if I've been in this relationship for X amount of time and there are still foundational issues, then this must be a blind spot in lesbian relationships.
So how did you overcome those issues?
Well, I had to do a lot of self-reflection and therapy to disconnect myself from that way of thinking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, if you hadn't met me, at this point in your life, could you see yourself being in a relationship with a woman who is dealing with that?
No. It's still a form of being in the closet. If you hadn't met me, do you see yourself being open to that type of relationship again?
With somebody that's dealing with internal struggles or depression?
Right.
No, not at my age. No.
Okay.
All right, guys. So this is the point in our video where we want to open it up for discussions to hear about your experiences. Guys, so this is the point in our video where we want to open the floor up for discussion to share and learn more about your experiences with internalized homophobia. If you've ever dated someone that has dealt with that, if you dealt with it through a relationship, or whether or not you dealt with it yourself.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing what you have to say and really encourage you guys to be as honest as you can, because like I said, we really want this space to be a unique space where we can really talk about things that aren't really discussed.
All right, guys. Leave your comments below. We will respond to each and every one of you as much as we can. Don't forget to thumbs up this video. And feel free to leave any topic suggestions that you have in the comments below. We would love to hear from you guys.
Thank you again for watching our first video. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to checking in with you guys again real soon.